system on fire. Military science, science fiction contest. Books or stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction contest. Discussion, interviews, reviews and rants. Military science fiction contest.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the show. Today, we are talking about psychological warfare and what that might look like in the future, which could be a lot of fun to play with because who knows what our psyches will be like, right, in 1,000 years. But I think that's one of the conceits we got to think about. Because, I mean, Rick, when you've kind of talked about this, but when it comes to how people think and what their vulnerabilities might be, how do you approach that?
It's really hard to imagine a seismic shift in the public consciousness. I mean, it's happened and we've seen it, and all we can do is base it on what's happened so far. But it's hard to imagine how the technological changes we posit in our books are going to change how people think. Like, nobody would have imagined how just the invention of the smartphone would change basically all of society, or the invention of the automobile would change the American consciousness. So it's very difficult to postulate that. You just have to do your best guess. But I feel like if you go by what's happened in the past, like industrialization in Europe and how it affected, people, you can make a kind of a estimate, at least something that sounds real, even if you're way off, which you probably are.
Well, I think I'm trying to remember the article I read or where it was. I don't know if you heard this as well, that like basically the way humans think has not actually fundamentally changed in thousands of years. Like the way that we approach problems, gather information. Now the world has changed around us rapidly in different ways, but if you took a Roman and uplifted them to our time frame, like it'd take them a while to adjust, but the way they like culturally they would be very different, but the way that they might solve problems once they had the information to deal with it, as long as they're willing to learn, there's not a lot of difference there.
I've heard the opposite from some things I've
Really?
read. That it's not like the mechanics of how we think, but the things we take for granted
Hmm.
that make us, that drive our actions and our reactions to things. That somebody from ancient Rome is 100 times more alien to a modern American than any of the aliens on any science fiction movie or TV show. That they just accepted things that we would find horrifying, and would find things we accept as normal, like not just horrifying, but kind of, I don't know the word I'm trying to think of, not heretical, but blasphemous.
Right.
Like the idea that you control your own fate, and that you can change not just your own circumstances, which they obviously believed in somewhat, but you can change the world. You can change how nature works. They would find that like something worth killing you over.
Well, I mean, I think I could find people nowadays that think that way, depending
Well,
on where you go.
possibly.
Yeah. But no, and I guess I do think that. I guess that's the question. Like, are we in a time of, things have changed so rapidly for humans that it does feel like sometimes it's hard to imagine what it will be like 1,000 years from now, especially if we genetically change or are changed by our technology in some way. But
Well,
I
that's
think
why a lot of my books, I have to, if I go that far ahead, I have to imagine some kind of a reset
yeah,
that throws us back, because I don't think it's really possible for us to come up with a realistic idea of what humans 1,000 years from now will think like. So I have to either restrict my science fiction to something closer to our time period, or I have to imagine that there was some kind of a disaster that reset us back to an earlier technological period and, froze our thinking in something I can understand.
Well, and I think in order for it to be relatable, that's something you have to do as well. Like otherwise, I mean, you could try and do something with Far Future Humans, and that could be interesting to read for a while. But if I
I've
just
read
want to
those
settle
books. I
in,
mean,
yeah,
there's a lot of like Gregory Benford, Greg Bear, Stephen, last name is escaping me. Shit. Um,
uh,
Stephen.
shoot, why
Anyway,
did I
there's a lot of hard science fiction writers who play with how we're going to be in the far future, and it's interesting to read, but it's hard to identify with the characters.
exactly? And I
Stephen
think
Baxter.
Stephen
Stephen
Baxter,
Baxter.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was reversing it and thinking of Neil Stevenson, but he,
No, I think Neil Stevenson is more of the opposite way. He tries to make everything relatable.
right, exactly. I mean, one of the things he said is he just wants to, you know, spin a good yarn, even though he
Yeah.
manages to get interesting stuff in there. But and where I'm going with this kind of discussion is like, okay, if we're going to talk about how to wage psychological warfare against individuals or a military force or anything in that realm, I think you got to set up the scenario that people still think in a way that we can understand. You know, if
Yeah.
they're uplifted Romans and we somehow attack them with like a single deity or something, like I don't even know what would, I have to think of some things that would really freak out a Roman.
Well,
Um, but
that's I went kind of with the Tani, I went kind of that direction, not Romans, but more like Egyptian slash
mhm,
Imperial Japanese. If they think that they are destined to own the universe, and they think that their emperor is a god, and if he loses a battle, that means that he's not the real emperor, that he's a phony, and they can kill him. Well, then all you have to do is beat them,
mhm,
and you can throw their whole society into chaos by proving to them that the guy who's running their show isn't the real emperor and they need to change, which can be a Genghis Khan like thing where he died. They all ran back to Mongolia to
everything he
elect a new Khan.
Well, didn't we drop propaganda on Japan about that? Like about the emperor is not a god and you can rise up
I
against.
don't remember. It's possible we did a lot of propaganda warfare in World War II. I mean, I'm sure somebody thought of that. If we did, it didn't work because they still made one of the peace agreement keys to keep the emperor. So
Right. I I mean, I love the idea of psychological warfare. I think it can be sometimes also a little bit of an easy button, depending on how it's implemented in a story. I don't like it when, like, I was just watching a kids show where the bad guys, I don't know, Transformers Prime with my daughter. I finally got her to watch a Transformers movie. Um, but but it pivots on the whole idea that they sneak in and show a recording of the bad guy doing bad stuff, and somehow that like is the easy button to shut everything down and they rise up against him. And that's
see,
not how the world.
that wouldn't work anymore, I think, in
No,
our because of all the deep fakes and AI.
right,
I think that more and more over the next few decades that seeing is believing is going to go out the window, that nobody is going to believe what they see anymore.
right.
I mean, we can see that already. People are so set in their political and ethical and religious beliefs that it doesn't matter what you show them or what you say to them, they're going to assume you're lying.
Hmm.
And that's just the way it is right now. And I don't think that that can change until as long as you have that kind of technology. I mean, like I mentioned, if there's some great reset where an asteroid strikes or something more prosaic like I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Peter Zeihan, but he
Yeah.
uh, he believes that eventually the global system is going to fall apart, and we're going to have to go back to a more pre-World War II type of economic structure where we are not so interdependent one nation upon another. And that is going to basically kill things like AI and, you know,
Well,
the all the apps
computer
on your
chips.
phone that,
Yeah.
it's gonna make things a lot more basic for at least 10 or 20 years
That's why I
until,
hoard old computers, man. You thought I was
yeah.
crazy about that, but it's going to be gold someday.
But the thing is, they're not going to be able to make the chips because
Right.
making the chips requires, going back and forth between several countries. And if that trade breaks down, then, you're not going to have those kind of technologies available for a while and it'll take like 10 years to build up that capability in a single country. So if you get to that point where you don't have that stuff, just either by some disaster or just through trade breaking down, then maybe we will change back to where, yeah, I see a video of somebody doing this. That means it happened. But right now, you got people that won't believe videos, won't believe audio, and with justification because it's very easy to fake them.
And it's, I mean, you'd like to feel that you have a finely tuned, like that picture looks weird. Like it used to be the number of fingers, or it used to be the lighting, or it used to be, but as it
The,
gets more
the
and more complex,
pixelization.
right? I mean, I read a book a couple of years ago, I guess, where everything you read online had like a verification rating, and then it all came down to trust and trusting authority because you'd have a group of people that it was their job to review things, and if you trusted those people and they gave it a trust rating, then that's what the article had that would lead you to believe. And the author had sort of thought of, well, this would be good for everybody. But the thing I was thinking is like, well, if I don't trust any of those people and I trust these people, then actually your rating system is really just still channelized, right? And it's just still echo chambers within the experts that people have decided.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the challenge. If you can't trust information, and in a battlefield situation, like control of information is so important. And that's one of the things we've saw across the global war on terror, or even, beginning in really in World War II, as global communications became more prevalent, the control of information from the battlefield to command and control networks to civilians, and as that progressed, think about the Walter Cronkite moment in Vietnam when he came back and said like Vietnam is bad juju, and the country turned on that because that was a single point of control on information the country got.
And ironically enough, he was totally wrong. When he said
Well,
the war was unwinnable, he said it right after the Tet Offensive.
right.
And in the Tet Offensive, not only had the Viet Cong been destroyed as an effective military organization, but the NVA had been so devastated that if we wanted, we could have rolled into North Vietnam right then. We didn't know it, but all the history show they were panicked after Tet. They were like, "We've lost the war," and then Walter Cronkite won it for them.
Well, and that's a great example of how you might say, or you might set up a scenario where, you have a much smaller force that seems decimated, that there's no way they can win. And then you could use something like psychological warfare or control of
Mhm.
information to turn the tide of that whole scenario. It doesn't even have to be the battle. It could just be, one side thinks they've lost, and so they withdraw.
But
And we've
that assumes a single point of information, though. I don't
right.
know that you could do that anymore because we have alternative realities we live in.
Sure. Well, and I think that's part of what you have to think of when you're setting up the whole idea. Because if you move into global war on terror with Donald Rumsfeld peeking over the shoulder of every operator, that's a different scenario. And now you're struggling against the idea of too much information. And how do you make, like, I remember a lot of stuff coming out at that time about like, how do you prioritize information? How do you decide what is the most important thing to focus on when you have so much coming at you? And and that also is a form of like that can freeze people. That can make it like impossible for commanders to make decisions if they're just overwhelmed with information, which is something I think we're also struggling with now. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, the war in Ukraine is a good example too of like, honestly, I don't try to track it. I can't tell oftentimes where it is and
There's
what it's
so
not.
much propaganda
Yeah,
out there. The Russians have huge amounts of propaganda, and the Ukrainians, although they're on a smaller scale, they'll do the same thing.
right.
You never know who's actually winning or losing these battles unless you have access to the raw intelligence.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and the idea that they're corrupt, like very possibly some of them, maybe not all of them. I don't know. I don't know who they are. I don't speak Ukrainian. So it's like it's
Well,
hard
I
to
mean,
figure out.
you pretty much you could pretty much take it for granted that every your Eastern European country is corrupt since the end of the Cold War.
Yeah,
I mean, including Russia. Russia turned into basically a mob rule. I say mob, like mafia rule
right.
in the 90s. So, you know, and now it's a combination of mafia rule and the old KGB.
Hmm.
It's and that is basically how things work in Eastern Europe since the fall of communism. Uh, I mean, if you look at Germany, absorbing East Germany might have been the worst thing that ever happened to West Germany.
Well, they knew that. I mean, I've read that that's one of the largest arguments about North Korea as well. Like South Korea does not want North Korea to fall because it would destroy their economy or could
Yeah,
destroy their
yeah.
economy.
Well,
And
they would be responsible for feeding all these
right.
hundreds of millions of starving people.
And I remember when I lived in Germany, like actually one of my friends, he ended up marrying her, a woman that her family was from East Germany. And she would complain all the time about how people were basically racist toward her because none of the West Germans liked the East Germans. And it was the
Mhm.
same kind of thing where they felt like they were taking their jobs and didn't want them coming into other parts of the country. So I think when you're setting up, like, what does the information environment look like? And then I think you need to think about the sort of mental state of the average soldier in the unit you're creating. This is if you want to do this, but I think it can be very interesting, especially as a side plot, or if you're doing anything with, spies or cloak and dagger, covert type operations. This is the kind of thing that could potentially be a linchpin that changes a story if you can inject something that people aren't quite sure what it's going to do, but then what is that message going to be? Is it like North Korean soldiers in Ukraine getting access to porn on their phones? Is it,
Well, that is genius, though.
yeah,
That's something nobody would have thought of.
exactly.
That's like a black swan type deal on a small scale. Um, if you can figure out something small like that that will disrupt your enemy's uh, unit cohesion, that I mean, the problem is as authors trying to figure out something that brilliant. Because
Right.
I don't know, I'm not that bright. I don't think I could.
Well, we
But
could
I was
recreate.
thinking more that maybe information warfare would be less effective, and you'd have to go back to something more visceral.
Mhm.
Like, for instance, what if you captured what if the enemy captured a human soldier and you know programmed him to go back to his unit and frag his officers,
Mhm.
you know? And that's going to be like a huge psychological blow, not just because it shows that somebody either the enemy can kidnap you at any time and program you, or that your side's lying and he did this on purpose because he didn't like what was going on. So it's going to make you either be afraid to leave the wire or afraid, of your fellow soldiers. So it's
That could
something
work
like
on
that
so
could
many
sow
levels.
mistrust.
Yeah, because I mean, there's already I mean, it's not a narrative, it's true. Like nobody wants to go to mental health in the military. You worry it's going to be used against you in some way. And then if somebody does act out, which has happened in almost every war at this point, somebody throws a grenade into a tent. And then if you thought that the enemy could actually reprogram your brain if you're captured, like there's no way you're going to let them capture you. So you're going to fight to the death every time. So that could have a lot of really interesting ramifications across how the story works. And the aliens might not be aware that that would do that to humans. Like, why are the humans still fighting? Or why are they fighting harder? We don't understand. It's like,
That's another piece of psychological warfare that you would do to your own side instead of the other side, which has happened a lot, is tell them if you surrender, you're going to be tortured or killed immediately to keep
mhm.
them from surrender. Like the Japanese believed that in World War II. Like they told the civilians on those islands, if you surrender, the Americans are going to kill you, you know? So,
And then the stories come out about Japanese cannibalism and things like that. And I believe
Yeah,
that
those
happened.
stories mostly came out after the war, though, so I'm not
Yeah.
sure that
I mean,
all
I
happened.
believe those things happened, but it does feel like the same kind of thing that could be used in
Yeah.
that kind of way.
Um, the most that I have dealt with this in one of my books was in the first Recon book, where the
Hmm.
main character winds up stranded on a planet they were trying to retake from the enemy, and he organizes the locals into a militia. It gets really, really bad, and the the Tani are like starving. They're executing people in public for every raid that the militia does, and they're starving civilians and showing them to them. And the militia gets really pissed off and starts doing things like basically crucifying the Tani and leaving him out there for their people to find, and it's a really, really disturbing descent into how guerrilla warfare can, turn people into animals.
Hmm.
And there's one point when the future equivalent of the CIA drops agents onto the planet, and they're telling him, you know, I want to know who's responsible for this thing where you've skinned the Tani alive and left them trussed up for their people to find. And and then they're about to say, well, we took care of that guy. He's not around anymore. And the guy says, because it's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the CIA does that kind of stuff because the army can't, right? Or the army won't. I mean, so one of the things about that, like, I guess that's the thing. You can do a lot of stuff with that in story because you don't know which way it could potentially go. Like, how will the Tani respond to that? How would an alien? And it also indicates like you have learned a certain amount about your enemy to be able to try and inflict some kind of psychological warfare on them. So you're kind of locked. It's like, you're locked in this sort of relationship with them as you figure this stuff out. And um, I mean, the Tani are always kind of pretty clearly the bad guy, but as both of them, we learn how to beat them or how they think or how they operate and what things we should attack or shouldn't attack, or um, it really kind of deepens that how that
Well, there's
conflict
there's a
works.
lot people like make a lot of mistakes in that kind of thing too.
Yeah.
Like in another book that deals with the same war, they make the mistake of attacking tiny religious
Hmm.
uh, shrines or whatever, and they justify it by saying, well, the people that visit those are high-ranking political and military officials, so we're targeting them, but it just pisses them off really bad.
Right. Yeah. So some other things one thing that always kind of freaked me out a little bit, which maybe isn't psychological warfare so much as weapons by other means, but like those sonic broadcast weapons that if you get too close to them, they just make you empty your bowels, or they give
The
everybody like
brown
a,
note.
yeah, I mean, everybody gets a screaming headache, or, you know, those sorts of weapons that aren't considered, people just don't think about, or they're not aware of, or you introduce something like that into the battlefield that is a real game changer, and that can also have a huge impact. Like, I always kind of wondered, like, why don't we just use those in more places? And
They're not really reliable.
yeah.
Um, but what I would like to see in a science fiction story is if you could come up with a weapon that is literally a terror weapon
Hmm.
that kind of something that makes you have hallucinations of your greatest fears. That would be, I tried to do that once. It didn't really work out as far as the plot went, so I had to drop it. But yeah, I think that would be a really cool kind of, it's a mashup of horror and science fiction, and mashups typically don't sell that well. So I don't know if it would sell, but I think it's a really cool idea that you
Hmm.
come up with a weapon that makes people, experience basically horror story levels of fear.
I mean, the story I sold to Bullet Points like was basically about a war where social media exists on both sides, and one country is broken away from the other one, and then one country makes like it's from the point of view of a lieutenant, and they basically get a list of people of dead combatants every day and phone numbers, and he has to call and make a casualty assistance notification to the family because they're still technically considered part of the country that they broke away from. And so it's a psychological warfare campaign against the other civilian population. And
Didn't
you
they
can
do
sort
that in Ukraine?
yeah, that's what where I got the idea was they were doing that to the Russians because they
Yeah.
all had it's not Facebook, they have some other social media thing, but they had
Well, they
scraped
also
all of it.
a lot of the younger ones had cell phones on them when they were
Hmm.
killed.
They call their families and stuff.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that never necessarily would have happened prior to the environment we're in now.
I mean, there's going to have to be a tightening of the rules or some kind of stronger discipline where they don't allow soldiers to have that kind of exposure.
Hmm.
I mean, because the way things are now, if we're not, I don't think we've been really heavily involved since in the war on terror since social media became like ingrained into the very fabric of our being. Uh, but imagine if, during the initial invasion of Iraq or Afghanistan, if we had had this kind of social media infused into our being where every soldier had a cell phone and every soldier had all their information online, that
Hmm.
would have been a nightmare, intelligence wise, psychological warfare. That would have been horrible.
I know we would have just really been fortunate that the Iraqis probably didn't have the way to target those devices if that was the case
Yeah.
back then. But that changed really fast. I mean,
No, I
that's
mean,
part of what.
if we did it now, if we were doing the Iraq invasion now,
Yeah.
you would have to confiscate everybody's cell phones,
Hmm.
basically.
Well, it also gets past the fact that Apple, Facebook, Apple, Meta, these companies, like a country is going to go do a major thing, which back in, throughout our history has been like the country is a unified government, unified, I don't know, action, right? But now we
Mhm.
have these sort of entities floating over those governments that cross them, where you could have two governments attacking each other, and Meta provides services to both of them, which is super weird. And when the answer really should be like Apple, shut it down. But if Apple or Google doesn't do that, now you have to confiscate the phone rather than actually have the company unified behind
There's
the
no way that Apple or Google would agree to that though,
I know, and that's a
because
that's crazy, right?
they're not strictly American companies.
Well, on
They're
paper they are, but you're
on
right.
paper, yeah, but
Yeah,
they have to think of investors all over the world.
right.
Yeah.
And
If they shut that down, then they lose buttloads of money, and the investors will say, "Well, you're out then." We're so.
and and that's what makes I think also thinking about psychological warfare when those entities exist on top of these conflicts. Like with aliens it's kind of easy because you would sort of hope aliens don't have Facebook, but if aliens infiltrate Facebook of the future, and now we've just handed them over a gigantic database of you know all this information about us and our hopes and dreams and complaints and whining, that's a whole
Well,
lot
that's
of
one thing
info.
that we had to adjust to in the books when I was about the Tani is like we have all this communications discipline and intelligence discipline in place, but the Tani, it doesn't matter if you use your real name, they
Hmm.
don't have access to the personnel records or anything. Uh, and although eventually I think I had them getting some kind of an intelligence network, it's kind of foreign to their way of war to do something like that.
Hmm.
So
Is there
we were doing all kinds of intelligence security that was not necessary against them because that's just the way we always did it.
and if they've never used encryption or encryption, the concept of encryption doesn't mean anything to them, that would be very different as well. Like that could be a huge force multiplier. But there's so many things you can play with here. I think from for me, the thing is you really, if you're going to use it, you really have to think about the rules of the game because and explain those rules to the reader. Because if you come up with an idea that doesn't, I don't know, it's really easy to paint yourself into a box, I guess, with this kind of thing. If it's, if some part of the plot is trying to pivot on this or it's trying to make some big change to the story, it really has to make sense within the world that has been created.
Yeah. I was also thinking, I mean, we've been like making assumptions about fighting aliens, but
Hmm.
if we're fighting other humans in the future, it's going to be a lot nastier than fighting aliens, even because we know our weaknesses.
Right.
And I was thinking about like right now we have like all kinds of security measures to prove who somebody really is. Identification numbers and IDs with chips in them, and presumably in the future, soldiers, anybody in the military is going to have some kind of implanted thing
Hmm.
that will prove who they are. But that is probably going to be another example of escalation between defense and offense, where the enemy is going to be able to fake that at some points. And then you get back into infiltration. I was thinking of like the Terminator movies, with the machines going in pretending to be humans.
Hmm.
But I mean, it doesn't have to be a machine. You send somebody, a suicide bomber in who's been physically altered to look like someone else, and say you kidnapped the soldier and didn't let anybody know he'd been captured, and you just replace him with somebody who looks like him to go in and do espionage or sabotage
Hmm.
or psychological operations. That's something that would be really nasty that would probably happen in a future war with other humans.
And that's, I was thinking of that Philip K. Dick story, which I think, what's it called? The Next Generation or the newest model where,
I think it was something model. I can't remember the
yeah,
title.
where you
The
can't
next
tell.
model.
You
I don't
can't
know.
tell who's an enemy and who's not, and so they are playing these games in the battlefield trying to figure out who the bad guy actually is. But I was also thinking about Peter Hamilton's Commonwealth, where anybody can be like basically you have a backup, and anybody can be reconstituted from the backup if they die. But he never really engages with the idea of multiple versions of a person, right? And then
Yeah,
how do you
that's
prove who
something
you
I
are?
have. That's something I did in Archangel. Is the main bad guy he comes up with this duplication technology where he can make adult versions of himself and read his memories into them. And rather than just like making himself immortal, which is what he does at first, he
Hmm.
starts making multiple copies of himself to be like field commanders because he knows he can trust them.
Hmm. But can
Um,
he?
but no, actually, as it turns out, he can't because um, memories that you read into the duplicate's brain don't have the same um, I don't know the word I'm looking for. They don't feel real.
The same fidelity, basically,
Yeah,
or yeah.
they're more like having read a book about something. You don't
Hmm.
have the emotional attachment to the memories. So they don't feel real, which means that every version of he duplicates of himself is more and more of a sociopath.
Yeah, more and more of a schizophrenic. I mean, isn't that what is that? That's there is an actual syndrome, I think, where people feel that way, like they're disassociated from the world.
Mhm.
But I mean, the other thing is that I've always kind of thought this, like you could call it a replica, but as soon as it exists and is having separate experiences than you are, it's a different person.
It's That's right.
It might have
Exactly.
your thoughts and feelings and your starting point, but um, and so it's going to have its own wants and needs, and you might try to make it do what you want, but you can't actually control that. So, but it seems like, but coming back to the verifying identity, like even though they have their own wants, like they still have your fingerprint, right? Or the ability to
Yeah.
be you. And that So another piece of psychological warfare that doesn't get a lot of play is the idea of bio warfare, or kind of what we're getting into here, that the soldiers' bodies could be used against them, injecting people with cancers, or, a lot of the stories and literature from the 50s and 60s were even that like radiation was not nearly as dangerous as people thought it was. And um, I took a course at Oak
And it
Ridge
didn't
where,
create nearly as many monsters as we thought
right.
it
But
would.
the whole point of this course was to try and convince us that radiation is not as dangerous as you think it is. It's like a campfire. If you jump over the campfire, you're fine. But if you stand in the campfire, that's a bad idea. But then as things changed in the 70s and 80s, like people like sentiment around nuclear power and radiation and the ideas of nuclear annihilation, which is certainly a real thing, but it felt like that sentiment changed a lot. And so the average soldier is probably a lot more freaked out. Whereas I met guys like in my world, air defense, there was the Nike Ajax and Nike Hercules, which were, I mean, this is crazy when you think about it. Basically, a missile mounted nuke that was designed to explode over a city and take out incoming missiles. And that was the kind of dome concept back then that, you know, in fact, in the Discord, the picture we have that's got the guy looking at the plastic thing, that's
Yeah.
actually from a brochure for air defense artillery back in the 70s. And it's in that brochure, it's like you can go live in any major city you want to because they have air defense installations at the cities. But that was the concept. And so I met guys that like, oh yeah, we've dealt with nukes. Like, what? And so it feels like that sentiment has changed a lot. And like even now, the soldiers that train with nukes are probably much more comfortable with them. But the average soldier, if you tell them you're going to field nukes, like that changes the game for a lot of people. Like, are they going to want to do that, or are they going to be freaked out and think they're all going to get nuked? Um, that can have a huge impact just on its own, where they're already dealing with the stress of combat, but now you're going to introduce a major weapon that could, you know, just be a god weapon that they aren't even haven't dealt with. Or what if you introduce viruses or other things that maybe they don't all happen all at once? They're like slow moving, and
That would
everybody,
be also, by the way, if you infiltrated people in, that could be something else they could do is spread worry about the weapons you're using. Like
right?
what this defense shield we're using, man, it's given us it's going to shorten our lives. It's giving us cancer. It's going to do this or that, or the battle suit. They don't tell you, but there's radiation leaks, and it's going to nobody lives more than 5 years after putting it on. Yeah, something like that to sow discord among the troops.
Yeah, and I mean, just the way humans think. Is getting back to, I guess, like basic human things, but we have a really hard time dealing with anything that takes a long time to kill you. Like the whole idea that, cancer stops being chronic if your life expectancy is 5 years, but you technically still have cancer. It's just the medical industry doesn't think of it the same way. And when I first heard that from an oncologist, I was kind of like, huh, but you still have cancer. And so the idea of infecting an enemy force, and you could really infect them with it, they just don't know, or then you tell them, and people start dying randomly or getting their children get impacted. Like that would just destroy a fighting force, at least a modern day one where we think, people have their families connected to them.
If you could use your intelligence gathering to target families back home,
That
that
too.
would destroy the unit cohesion. That would be an incredible psychological warfare weapon.
Yeah. And I'm surprised that doesn't happen more, quite honestly. Like the amount of families that, are
Well, the
on
reason
social
it doesn't
media.
happen more is probably because it's really, really hard to infiltrate people into a country to target a single family without attracting too much
Well,
attention.
I guess I wasn't thinking physically. I mean, like online, like,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, going, like even just using Facebook to target facial recognition and to build databases of people's families and then just bully their kids. I don't know, like the ways that they could, mess with people's lives and take their mind off the fight are,
Yeah.
it seems like that's another thing why I get frustrated with these ideas of companies doing this stuff, because they make us so vulnerable. And rather than making the company change, we make the people change. We think we can make the people change. But I digress.
But I digress.
Yep. Let's see. So we haven't gotten into also like implants, or if we get into a future where that's maybe all virtual reality or people are fighting in virtual spaces, which I think we've talked about is not super interesting because where are the
Yeah.
stakes? But this is also the kind of thing where, like you were saying earlier, like you could hijack somebody's VR or hijack their, an optical implant or, things like that to just mess with them in subtle ways. Like that's almost more terrible than just shutting it off, or things
Yeah.
like that. You could really play with
Well, that
that.
might lead, I mean, the possibility of that, although all that VR stuff wouldn't be interesting if that's the main thrust of your story, having that as a backstory where the possibility of that or having it happen in the past has forced people back to more primitive methods of warfare might be interesting.
Hmm.
Like it's like we can't do implants or we can't do um, um, like virtual reality type of communications or control because the enemy in the past has hijacked it. So now we're back to, a guy physically controlling something with the joystick or whatever.
Right. I was just thinking about if anybody's listening that has a background in civil affairs, please comment because I would love to. There might be all kinds of things we're missing that a civil support unit would actually be doing, like in today's day and age, like dropping pamphlets with drones or um, other sorts of interesting things like that that we might be missing. Because
Yeah.
I wanted to say that I think of psychological warfare as more of a total warfare type thing. Like it's not used unless like you absolutely want to destroy the enemy. But I think that's totally not true because we have like the U.S. Army has civil support units that do this kind of stuff all the time as part of any operation. And like they have social media influencers now that, are trying to get people to enlist, but there could be other ones that are trying to shape the narrative in different ways.
Yeah. I was thinking, what if you have a drone go into some place like North Korea and drop like cell phones connected to some kind of Starlink type of network off where people can access the internet and
Yeah.
see the outside world that they haven't seen before.
I mean, she just dropped food on them. Drop loaves of bread with, internet capable cell phones in them. But it really like destroying the morale of an enemy. Like it's such a fragile thing. It seems to get somebody to have the will to fight. And how do you develop that from like within our own culture? We talk about that. Like, how do you really continue to have the will to fight or get people who are willing to do it, leaders who are willing to lead in that way, and how easy it can be to break that over time. And that's where I think, a lot of the stuff about like we are in constant information campaigns from other countries like that. That's why I don't use
People,
TikTok, so I can't argue for it, but that feels like the biggest argument against TikTok.
there was recently a thing on X, I don't know if you saw it,
Uh-uh.
where they have put it into the profiles of the whose account people's accounts. So you can see now what country they're based
Oh,
out
where
of.
they're from. I did read about that.
Yeah. And it's amazing how many accounts are based in, accounts that are supposed to be like American accounts are based in like Nigeria or Pakistan
Yeah.
or, East Asia. And there's accounts that are supposed to be in Gaza that are based in Saudi Arabia or, the Philippines or something like that. There's just like incredible amounts of psychological warfare going on. And who knows who's paying for those, you
Hmm.
know? I mean, those Nigerian accounts, are those being paid for by the Chinese or the Russians? You don't
Right.
know.
And thinking about those timelines, like it doesn't even have to be somebody saying death to America. They could just be doing subtle things over time, building influence so that these sorts of,
I mean, I think like a lot of them are spreading conspiracy theories
yeah.
to decrease people's trust, not in the government, because a lot of people don't like the government, but in our history,
Oh,
what
yeah.
you think you know. And like, oh, the Nazis weren't that bad, or the communism isn't that bad, or these things that happened, this was the fault of the Jews, things like that. That a lot of these accounts are saying stuff like that. They're trying to make you doubt the stuff that you were told when you were a kid in school or by your parents. Make you doubt who the bad guy is and who the good guy is in your head because that suits their, their
Right. And they're,
goals.
I feel like I've been ranting about that forever, but it's not, it's not even that they believe one narrative or another. They just believe they just want to sow discontent. So
And they and
they're
they
A/B testing.
they have hundreds of thousands of
Exactly.
followers.
Exactly. Well, they have hundreds of thousands of accounts. They'll A/B test one thing, like, does socialism get more traction than communism? Does, you know, like hating on Jews get more like they A/B test words and concepts just like
Mhm.
advertising. And they
Yep.
don't even care if people believe one thing or another. And it's been documented on both sides. Like that's why the whole like right left thing drives me nuts in the US because it's been documented on both sides that like Facebook groups were formed, events actually happened in the real world based on those events that were started by a disinformation campaign. And everybody
Yeah.
gets mad at the people. And I'm like, this is Facebook knows where these came from. Facebook is selling them the advertising.
There was some guy,
And
some African guy who wasn't just a regular politician, but somebody, they don't know who, probably his enemies, set up a Facebook group that called him like somebody who slaughtered civilians,
yeah,
you know, and eventually he was murdered.
yeah. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but I have read about a few, you know, genocides essentially that have come off social media, you know. And if Rwanda, if social media had existed back then, like that basically happened through a radio campaign against one ethnic group. But the thing that I was going to note about I did read the fact that okay, now we can see everybody's locations, and X didn't announce they were going to do it. So the thing that will be interesting to watch is how many of those accounts because they can pretty easily just start using VPNs, and
Yeah,
so
he's
they'll all start saying they're from
yeah.
whatever country, and so how do we then track that as they countermeasure
You
against
can
that
tell
countermeasure?
somebody's using a VPN. No, I'd really like it if they just said this account is using a VPN, so
Yeah,
it may not be from the country it says it's coming from.
and they can. It's just a matter of like, will they do that or not? And again,
Yeah.
you have this overarching entity that can do what you want or not do what you want, and I feel like that's one of the hugest failures of government in our time. Is the government is the only thing that should have the power to control this or force them to do one thing or another to keep people safe, and they just don't. You know, so
It's difficult to see. The problem is most people don't trust government to do the right
right.
thing when it comes to that. It's more likely, in my opinion, that the government does. I mean, and this has been a problem in Britain.
Mhm.
They've said, "Oh, we're doing these internet controls to keep people safe," but then it's really
But then
just
yeah. And,
it's just we're going to control people who say things we don't like.
but see, I also wonder, are they highlighting those stories of them being crazy over the stories of, and I'm not saying that is good. Like, I think that is absolutely an
But
overreach of
you
free
can't
speech.
if you can't trust the people who run the companies, I don't see any reason you can trust people in government more than that.
Right.
I think that there needs to be, in my opinion, a technological solution to this that lets you see the reality of it.
Hmm.
Like where you can trace where these messages are coming from, like an app that will do it automatically. You don't have to count on somebody to tell you the truth.
I know we gotta work on that one. I mean, honestly, I try to use like there are other alternate social networks like Mastodon or PeerTube or, more open source, open controlled servers. But the problem there even is like you might have a thing where everybody can look at the software and determine if it's got corruptions in it or not. But they're still privately controlled servers by people that can control what's going through them.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. I think anytime you're gonna have network communication like this, it's going to be and even then, like I worry, we all imagine a future where how cool will it be to have like, the ability to access all information in our heads all the time. But more and more, that just terrifies me.
Oh,
Like,
it's can you? I mean, if you watched the movie, what's that one with Tom Cruise where they're doing the pre-crime
oh, Minority Report. Yeah,
Minority Report? You saw like he he sees individual advertising everywhere he goes.
right.
That
Oh,
would
that's
be
coming. I mean, as
huge.
soon as Meta is the company that's working on this the most, they have their Ray-Ban glasses, which look pretty cool. Like people are still like, don't like the idea of people wearing glasses on their faces, but they're reducing the size of them enough that eventually you won't be able to tell that there's, cameras in there. And they are already like, they're not focusing on that part of it, but I think that is absolutely what they're aiming for. They want to have like all, augmented reality in front of everybody. And I'll be looking at you right now, Rick, and I'm going to see an advertisement on your closet door behind your head. And they know because I look at your head, I'm not going to look away from the closet. And, I mean, I have to upgrade to the upper tier to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's the other thing is that a lot of these places are charging you not to have advertising. I mean, that's the thing with streaming services now. Netflix makes so much money from advertisement, from commercials, that they keep upping the price for the non-commercial tier to the point where they're going to get it to where most people won't bother. And
Hmm.
that's what they want because they make so much money from commercials. And that's another part of psychological warfare we don't usually think about in military science fiction is that the people doing the psychological warfare may not be a government.
No,
It might
absolutely.
just be some company that wants you to do something that may or may not benefit your government and your side in the war because it benefits them.
They want an oil pipeline from Pakistan through through Afghanistan. So who knows what they're going to do? I mean, that's
I don't
that.
think it's going to work because Afghanistan is
Oh,
not a
that's
stable enough place to host an oil
no, that's
pipeline.
that's one of the conspiracy theories about the Cheneys was that one of the reasons we went in Afghanistan was to secure a supposed pipeline.
Well,
Um,
that didn't work, did it?
I know I can't remember the name of the port it was supposedly running to, but that was the idea. And and that's
I
what's
mean,
unfortunate.
I have to feel like if you think that happened, you have to believe Cheney was really stupid
Or
because
really evil. And I don't.
no,
That's
no.
the
I
thing.
mean, you can believe he's evil and stupid, or you can believe he's evil and smart. But if you believe that, you have to believe he's evil and really stupid, because anybody who looked at the history of Afghanistan has to know you're not going to pull that off.
Right. There are easier ways to make money, that's for sure.
Yeah,
But that's all part of like, going back to Netflix, that's like how subtle are these things going to be and how spread apart, how is this media reaching us? What are people paying attention to? I don't watch TikTok, so I really can't speak to
I
that kind
don't.
of thing. But the whole idea
TikTok is controlled by the Chinese government. I would never watch it. I would
in their
never.
algorithm, I mean,
It's it's totally owned by a company that is controlled by the Communist
yes.
Party in China. And people put this crap on there and watch all these videos and they don't understand that they're being manipulated.
And everybody says how good the algorithm is. And the one time I did get on there, like somehow I got down a track of it wanting to recommend like I think it was Romanian, like some Eastern European tourism thing. And I was like, I don't want to go there. Why do you keep showing me this? But the thing is, I wonder how good is it? Like I tend to always think like things are not actually as technically advanced as people say they are in the current day that we're living in. Like they might try and say it's the algorithm is amazing and subtle, but I wonder like about that because they have the aggregate data of all those users. And so they could tell, like the whole thing Facebook did where they were supposedly trying to manipulate people's moods through the posts that they were showing them when they were trying to engage, like track engagement across users. And I mean, they've admitted to this in court. And so I wonder about those kinds of things with TikTok as well. Like, did they learn from the fact that Facebook was outed? And so now they are very subtle in how they do it. But then how do you measure it? Like, what, and that's why if an outcome of just disrupting people and making them hate their government and hate fellow people in their country, if that's your outcome and that's your desired outcome, then it seems pretty successful. But
Yeah.
that's why they're aimed at, like, it's not a specific metric of we want X to happen. It's just a metric of foment discontent and
Well,
watch it play out.
and you got to think that if theirs is working so well, what are we doing in their country too? And how
Yeah.
well is it working? And you have to come to the conclusion that if everybody's psyops are working so well, eventually the entire world's going to fall
I
apart.
know. Well, that's why I'm hoarding computers, Rick. I keep trying to
Yeah.
tell you. When the grid falls,
I feel like this is all coming to a breaking point.
I
On
I
I
wonder
feel
too.
like we have come this far, uh, and it doesn't seem like there is any brakes on it, like there's anything to check it.
Mhm.
But I feel like it's coming to a point where it's all going to just shatter, and none of this is going to work anymore. And there's going to be a new what's the word I'm looking for?
Like
Uh,
paradigm maybe, or
yeah, paradigm. There's going to be a new
yeah.
paradigm when it comes to information. I don't know what it's going to be. Um, as a science fiction writer, I can speculate, but I'm probably wrong because nobody foresaw what would happen with the internet. I mean,
Mhm.
people foresaw the internet. That was predicted a long, long time ago, uh, as early as like the turn of the 20th century in some ways. But nobody foresaw what it would do to society. And I have no idea what a post-internet world looks like. And when I say post-internet, I don't mean the internet will disappear, but that our online presence is going to fundamentally change.
Yeah.
And that's going to affect psychology and psychological warfare and just the very fabric of society.
The Butlerian jihad was not just AI, right? It was
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Everybody's worried about AI. I'm not worried about AI. I am much, I don't, people, in my opinion, are totally overestimating what AI can do. What I am worried about is the effect of this, the how the permutations. I'm trying to think of an adjective,
Mhm.
but I'm trying to think of like the effects of how much the internet and social media has wormed its way into every detail of our lives. How what's going to happen when that blows up? I mean, because it will blow up, and it could blow up in a way that is positive and that we are less confrontational and less naive and less, buying into anything anybody says from some faceless pixels on a screen, or it could blow up in a really violent way that will do really bad things across the world. And that worries me.
I'm less inclined to believe it's going to blow up. Well, I think if you look at the Arab Spring and what happened, like a lot of that was supposedly enabled by Twitter. And I wonder sometimes how much of that was potentially manipulated.
It
But
was mostly manipulated.
yeah, but that was a place where you had a communication layer that enabled an uprising against the government. And it basically,
ISIS is very, very sophisticated when it comes to their online presence.
yeah, yeah. And but that got shut down is the thing. It
Yeah.
didn't have an enduring impact. And now, if anything, Egypt in particular is probably more authoritarian than they ever have been. Um, I the thing that I worry most about with AI, like I agree with you, I don't think AI is nearly as good as people think it is. I do really worry about aggregate data. I don't like our ability to collect and crunch aggregate data, both video, everything else that we do, things about our lives, the shows we watch, the books we read, the music we listen to. All of that is has a potential to be recorded and crunched in some way that can then be used directed back against us or in ways to tell what people are going to do that we've never had in our history. And a lot of that is happening below the surface. Like I was just reading an article about like web browser fingerprinting and we try to use ad blockers, we try to block a lot of what we do to, get rid of advertising online, but that has not realize that like companies have basically moved beyond that. They don't care about the like direct cookie tracking. They can tell who you are, where you live, what you do just based on everything about your browser, like the totality of what you do when you sit down at a computer. And and it gets cheaper and easier to save it, like record and save that data. And companies like Palantir, like that's what they're all about is integrating that data across different networks so they can all be used um, in a way that hadn't been before. And I don't know where that's going to go. That weirds me out a lot.
I don't know. I think that how much that data is useful is going to depend on how much on what happens with the internet, with our societal
Yeah.
connection to the internet. Is that data going to be useful if we disconnect ourselves from the online experience? Probably not. You know?
I mean, in China, their social capital system, I can't remember exactly what they call it. Like I guess I had read some things that this has maybe declined recently, but it used to be that like every neighborhood had their little snitch that
Yeah,
was rating people based on their social capital score. And if that person didn't like you, you were screwed basically. Like the book I read had the example of a guy that like his bank accounts got shut down. He couldn't buy a train ticket. He couldn't, all these things he couldn't do because his score had lowered enough. And that gets
yeah.
scary. I don't want my kids to live in that world, you know?
Well, I think that that's the problem I have with things like the new British internet controls that they put into place
Yeah.
is that it doesn't take much at all to move from there to that. Is it social capital? I can't remember the right word. It's something capital.
Mhm.
Uh, to move from one to the other. Um,
And also that
and
varies.
all it takes is one person who's not afraid to do something that's unpopular at first, but they know they have the power to do.
Mhm.
Uh, there's a thing in Britain recently where a one of their high judges is saying we're going to move away from jury trials for criminal offenses, and it's like, do you have the power to? He has the power to do it if he wants.
We'll just
It's
have
not
AI
popular, but
adjudicate it. I mean, did I tell you about the book I read? Uh, if I told you this anecdote, I guess I'll share it with everybody else. There was a court in New Jersey. There was a guy who loaned. This happened recently, like in the last 3 years. This guy loans his car to somebody. Um, that car is used in an armed robbery. Car gets linked back to him. He ends up in court. He has no record, but the court is using an AI tool to
mm,
prioritize cases and to make sentencing um, proposals based on the AI's algorithm or whatever it is. This guy gets 10 years. He had a clean record. Though as of reading this book, he had a clean record. Well, his lawyer goes back and tries to say like, well, hey, they found out that they used this AI, that the judge was using it. So they go after the company and like, can you show us the algorithm you used to make this decision? And the company comes back and says, that's proprietary information. We won't release that to you. So you had a government entity using a private company with supposed, proprietary information, and this guy's still in jail. And that's the kind of thing that freaks me out with that sort of discussion. Like,
yep,
yeah, you can't trust humans. You could argue against juries all you want, but I also don't trust the people making the AI. So,
yeah, um, yeah. I feel like we are heading one. If we keep going the way we are going, which I don't think we will. Like I said, I think we're heading for a breaking point. But if we kept along the path we're on, the whole Heinlein thing, if this goes on,
mhm,
we were heading one of two ways. Either we're heading for a society that's controlled by algorithms that have no kind of judgment, that act purely on the data they're fed, or
mhm,
we're heading for a dictatorship where people claim the algorithms are doing it, but they're just using them as tools to control everybody.
right.
But like I said, I think we are heading in multiple countries. It feels like there's a tipping point coming where this stuff is going to just shatter on the cliffs of history. I don't know how. Like I said, it could be violent, it could be nonviolent, it could be good, could be bad. But
Man, there's your near future military science fiction story. The
yeah,
shatter on the
that's
cliffs of
that's
history.
it. I don't know. It's kind of a depressing topic for a military science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, pulling it back, like that is one of the things that we talk about. Like military science, one of the, for us anyway, military science fiction stories should ultimately make you feel good about the thing. Like, bad things happen, people make hard decisions, but they're fighting for what are justified reasons. And it's pretty difficult to make that near future history right now. So
It is.
I don't know. Hopefully this conversation we pulled it a little too close to home, but I guess my goal with this would be like it can go so many different ways, and there's so many different ways you can do it that I think it is a very interesting. I do like to read it when it's done well. It's always really interesting to see how that I know there is an actual term for the other element of warfare that psychological warfare is. I just can't remember the
Mhm.
doctrine on it. But how that element comes into play on the battlefield is always super interesting.
Well, it's like kind of like that meme uh, where you don't want to read a dystopian thriller. Too bad you're in one. Well,
Right.
like you don't want to read about psychological warfare. Well, you are in a psychological war every single day.
I know. Well, I mean, all we can, I just, how do we educate people? And if like we could write a story that has an anecdote or scenario that maybe helps people recognize something maybe that's happening today and be aware of it. If people never thought about the fact that these things could be doing this to them,
I
how do
don't
we
know if you've
break?
ever heard of the Y Files.
No.
It's a YouTube channel where a guy he does a lot of
Oh, you did tell me about that. Yeah.
there's a lot of conspiracy theories and UFO stories and stuff. And then
Yeah.
at the end, he like says, "Okay, but how much of this can you prove, or is there any evidence?" But he recently did a thing on psychological operations
Hmm.
and how people misunderstand it. It's not whether it's not that the person doing the psyop is or the thing they're pushing is good or bad. It's That's not the point. The point is that everybody on both sides of every issue, every government on both sides, they all do psychological operations designed to convince people of things.
Right.
Sometimes those things you might think that thing is right, that it's just, but they all do it. And it's very easy to see that you're being manipulated. Uh, and like I said, maybe the manipulation is for something positive, but they're still manipulating you. And that's not anything new, really. That's been going on
Oh no.
forever.
I mean, advertising is psychological warfare that came
Yeah.
out of World War II. I
And,
want to buy
and
the Star Trek Enterprise, which is $399, and Lego knows this and keeps showing me posts about it. And I
you
keep
know,
telling myself I am not going to buy the Lego Enterprise for $399, even if I can get a free shuttle. And I'm doing it to you right now. So people are going to be
yeah.
watching this thinking about it.
So you are constantly being manipulated by companies, governments, and the real tough part is digging through all that to the actual facts and making a decision about where you stand on an issue.
Mhm.
Um, and like I said, it's not necessarily a negative thing that there's manipulation going on because, I mean, getting the country to stop smoking or to use seatbelts or to stop littering, all of those were psychological operations. They were manipulating you, but they're manipulating for something positive. You shouldn't smoke. It's bad for your health. You shouldn't litter. You shouldn't throw crap out of your car. You should wear seatbelts.
That's exactly what Big Seatbelt would say, Rick.
Yeah, but they are manipulating you. The key, I guess, the key is that there is always going to be a sizable percentage of people who aren't going to learn the truth themselves and are subject to manipulation one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we that's been the case since like back in the Middle East when Babylonian and Egyptian priests convinced people that that you were meant to be a slave. You're
I
meant to
mean,
labor in the fields, and it's against the will of the gods if you try to change that.
our language shapes how we think. That's, the most basic of, fundamental manipulations in the way that we approach the world, right? Like the language
Mhm.
that we use, the thoughts we have. Yeah. I don't know. We're freaking everybody out. So we're trying to convince you to read military science fiction. and and we'd love to hear like great examples that you have seen of this in a story because we were going through some different ideas before we started talking, but um yeah, I would love to see some examples because I would love to read where, people have approached this idea and different ways of doing it. And also, I always love to read older stuff too to see like how people thought of this when the internet didn't exist, when they were trying to imagine what this might look like, and then now how people are doing it currently. So, yeah, well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time. So, later.